talk about carbon emissions a lot. I mean, a lot. But what are they exactly? And what is carbon? What is carbon? It turns out that carbon is the foundation of the earth and of us, people, and all life on this planet. It's how we humans have been using it that matters. Don't take my word for it. Today, we're going to hear from the director of an extraordinary new documentary that explores carbon, and you will hear more about it, so stay tuned. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and ESG-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. We give career advice in every episode, especially at the end, so make sure you stay tuned for that. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts, on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes articles as well. Please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. If you're struggling with your own career, especially in this insanity, please reach out to me on Twitter and let me know. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. Carbon. We're made of it. We breathe it in. We breathe it out. Everything around us is made from it. It's how we use it that is both wonderful and destructive. That's what an extraordinary new documentary called Carbon, an Unauthorized Biography, is all about. With acclaimed scientists, one of whom, by the way, was on this show a few years ago. With acclaimed scientists, our guest today used her remarkable creative talents and those of a clearly remarkable team to produce a film that is both informative and engaging. It's also won a slew of awards, and I'm not surprised at all. So let's talk about it. I'd like you to meet Daniella Ortega, media executive, filmmaker, documentarian, producer, writer, and more, who is the originator, writer, and co-creator of this extraordinary new documentary, again called Carbon, the Unauthorized Biography. It's a mix of animation and science and storytelling that will hold your attention and move you. I did watch it. Daniella has spent over 20 years producing extraordinary award-winning media projects, including The Battle of the Brains, which sounds like right up my alley, A Wild Year on Earth, Brilliant Lives, and many, many more. Today, she's development and investment manager at Screen Australia, too. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in architecture, which is fascinating in of itself, and studied filmmaking and media at the Australian Film, Television, and Radio School and at the University of Technology, Sydney. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Daniella Ortega to Electric Ladies Podcast, joining us from Australia. Welcome, Daniella, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joan, for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to talk to you. And thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Thank you so much. So this film is amazing, and it's so creative. It's powerful writing. The music was powerful as well. And by the way, the person I mentioned that was on my show is Catherine Hayhoe, Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. So she's amazing. How did you come up with this film idea? Tell us the story of how it came to be.
Let me see where to begin. I have 2 small children. I think I'll start at that point. I have a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old. When my eldest was younger, when he was about 5 or 6, I was really trying to find ways to talk to him about our changing world. He was only small. And so I was trying to find ways that were authentic and real and factual, but also engaging and also not going to scare the pants off him. So I really was, and I would tell him little bits and pieces. I tell him about, how carbon is in us. And I would take his hand and I would say, do you realize that you come from the stars? And I'd tell him about that. And then I'd tell him a little bit about how we breathe. We breathe out what plants breathe in. And I would tell him a little bit. But I really was starting to think, I really want to have, how can I, it'd be great if I had this sort of foundational story I could tell him, I could show him, not just tell, I could show him. That was one part. And the other part was just myself. I really felt like I knew I'm a pretty, I feel like I'm a pretty enlightened person, pretty informed. I feel like I knew stuff. But then I didn't know stuff as well. Like, what is carbon? Right? So I keep talking, you hear about it all the time. You hear about it all the time. And yet I kind of didn't really know what it meant. So I did it for me. I was started to learn about it for me, and I did it for my kids. And so that was kind of the internal rumblings, the motivation, that kind of drive you to something when you want to tell a story, as you'd know, like there is something in you that seeks this out. And then the external thing, there's an external inspiration, is I read this book. Well, actually, I read the story in a book called The Periodic Table of the Elements. It was a book written by Primo Levi. I'm not sure how to describe. And it's a series of short stories about the elements, and the last one is about carbon. And it's this little story. It's only a few pages, and it's a beautiful story about the story of a carbon atom. And it's not about climate. It's not about it was written a long time ago. It's just this sort of inspiration of, it's a beautiful story about an atom, and I can see the journeys of this atom. Maybe I can take that. Maybe I can extend on that idea. It wasn't in the first person. It was just about a carbon atom. But the writing, the poetry of it, the visual sense of it, it sparked something. So with the internal rumbling, that external spark, led me to start to imagine the life story of carbon, which is what the film is. It's a biography. It's the life story of carbon. And I took that idea further and further, as I extended on it, changed it, thought about, gave carbon a personality, and made carbon a persona, which is quite weird, really, when I think about it now. But yes, that's what started it. That's what led me to the film. Yeah.
I love that. And so I don't want to ruin it for anybody, and we'll talk about where they can watch it in a moment. But it's the story of, it's a biography. It's the story of carbon from the beginning to now. And I love the way you weave in, how can I say this? It's almost like now that I know you studied architecture, I can see it kind of an architecture bent in it. You built the story of how carbon has built our world and us and where it is now. And so I don't want to ruin it for anybody. I just want to kind of entice them to watch it, and I want to explore how you did it and what you learned from it, not just about carbon, but in general, about communicating these issues. You also, you talked at length about or in the film, about how carbon is both the core of who we are, literally, that our bodies are made of, et cetera, as you just said, and destructive, because of how we've been using it for so many years. How did you think about telling the story? So did you start with did you want to sort of pick up where the periodic tables of the elements left off? How did you build the story? How did you start with your fingertips on the keyboard?
Well, first I sort of pull out for a moment and think, well, why? I think I have to deconstruct a bit why I chose to make carbon a person.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah.
In the film, for those that haven't seen it, you don't actually see carbon as an actor or anything like that, but you hear carbon. Carbon speaks in the film. And so I definitely imagined carbon as a woman who speaks.
We can talk about why you made her a woman.
Yeah, who speaks, she has thoughts, she has emotions, she has opinions, she's a person. And I think once I got that idea in my head, I think that was motivated by a number of things. It was motivated by, well, I wanted to make a film that wasn't just informational. There's a lot of films about, I mean, you can look up what is carbon on Google. You could find out what that says. You could pick up a chemistry textbook. You could find out, what is climate change. Like, there's a lot of information out there. But I guess what I wanted to do was something that hit our hearts, that something that drew us in emotionally. Because I feel like I'm not sure, if you've heard this before, Joan, but I guess I feel like you don't really have a hope in hell of changing people unless you make them feel something. If you change people's minds unless you make them feel something. So I think I see my job a lot as a filmmaker most of the time, not just telling information, but making people feel. And so how do you do that with an element, like with a chemical element? And I had this idea, to make carbon a person. Maybe, just maybe, we could relate to carbon in a different way, or have a different, tell a different story, about carbon that we haven't heard before. Anyway, that's the kind of reasoning towards carbon as a character, the original ideas around that. So sitting down.
So let me just add one little thing to that. It sounds like what you're saying in a different way is you wanted us to have a relationship with carbon.
Absolutely. You got it. I wanted to have a relationship with carbon. We actually do all have a relationship with carbon, right. But it's more about wanting to illuminate this relationship, or understand, or make clear our relationship with carbon. That's really
give it dimension, right?
Give it dimension, yeah. Anyway, so then coming to, like you were saying before, what you're doing is sit at the keyboard at this blank page. You've got all these ideas. You've got Prima Levi and got my kids, and wanting to illuminate a relationship with carbon. I was pregnant at that moment with my second baby, who is now 5. So think about how long ago that was. I was pregnant, really pregnant, by the time I got round to sitting down. So I'm sitting at the table with a big belly, bumping against the table, and thinking about that that I couldn't ignore that. I mean, I have another child coming on, and thinking about their future, being scared about it, but also hopeful. You've got to be hopeful. You've got a baby, and so that's where the film begins. The film actually begins, literally, the story in the film begins with a baby in the womb. And the voice of carbon says something like, I wonder who this child will become. I wonder what will be the story of his life. And that was me. Like, they were my actual thoughts. And it was very much intertwined with those questions about the future, us, and our relationship with carbon. So that's where we begin.
And what it sounds like you were thinking about what your child's relationship with carbon would be, right? When everybody watches the film, they'll see that there's the baby in the womb is expanded because there's a family that is the thread throughout the film. It's a beautiful, loving, wonderful, fun family that just makes you smile from ear to ear. And it sounds, now that you say what you say, that they are kind of sitting in for you, in a way. So you also addressed, you worked into it, and I don't want to, I could spend like 7 hours talking about this film, but you also addressed fossil fuels, and you addressed coal, and you did it, in my opinion, in a very clever way. So how did you decide how to do that? And I saw on some of the write-ups that your team sent me that there was an effort to kind of not take a position, but you are, but Carbon
we
takes
do.
a position. You do take
Yeah.
a position.
Yeah.
So how was that, how were those choices made? I mean, we all make choices when we're putting these things together, right? And I'm a producer and I'm a writer, et cetera. So I have a particular
making
kind of
choices
eye
all the time.
Yeah. So how did you weave that, and how did you decide how to weave that, how to evolve into that?
It wasn't, I mean, yes, these are things we grappled with all the way through from beginning to end of the process. But because it's about, these, like the choices that you make, like you say, like they have a huge impact, but there's a million of them. And so it's nuance and detail and shape and tone and all of that. But just fundamentally, overall, we knew, like I say, and from the outset, I knew I wanted to tell a story about our changing world. I knew I wanted to tell a story that would give us understanding and clarity about that and about our relationship now, in the past, now, and moving forward. Right. So that was kind of that's where I'm coming from. And so once you've got that, because carbon itself, you could make a 10-hour series about carbon, you could make a 100-hour series about carbon, but no, this is my, I'm thinking I want to make a film. People can watch it in one go, beginning to end. So we're talking about 90 minutes, roughly. That's about might be pushing it, but around roughly. That's my window. I've got people's attention for this long. I want to tell this, get to that point of this, of the story, of this sort of level of understanding. Whew, okay, so you've got to make choices as to what you're going to tell. But I knew very clearly where I was going. So in many ways, it's complicated and so forth, but it's also simple in a way, because you kind of know this is where I want to talk about our changing world. I want to talk about how carbon interacts with our world that, makes it so now. So then you have to go backwards and go, okay, so what led to that point? What are the 3 or 4 things, that I can tell in my little window of time that I've got people's attention, that can help us understand how we got to here. And then what am I going to say after that? How do I feel about the future? How am I going to, interpret that into maybe another 15 minutes worth of people's time? So that was the kind of structuring of it, the bare essential bits of carbon's life story, which help us understand how we got to now and what we could possibly do about it. And when I say how we come to now, you're right. We begin, it is a science film at the beginning. I mean, it is a science film all over. So we begin with the very beginnings of carbon. How is carbon born? It's an amazing story.
Yeah, I learned a lot actually from it, and I'm not a novice to this, but I learned a lot from it. And the way you did it, using animation to reinforce what's said, and
well, you have to, because you can't see carbon. You're making visible what's invisible, so you have to have animation. And so, in some ways, those big choices they were not. This sounds obvious now. It's not obvious, because during the process, it's very difficult to figure out how to do this. But now, looking back on it, it feels like, of course, it had to be this way. It's funny. It's funny now thinking about it. Well,
when you frame it as a biography, that gives you a structure right there.
Absolutely.
And, from its birth to current time,
to growing up or formative years. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And, you can break it into acts of, toddlerhood, teenage, tweens, teenager, adult.
And then the people, that's right. The biography is a great device because it's a genre that's well known. People understand biographies, right? I understand biographies. I love biographies, right? So when I was pitching it, I would say, and the people that talk to pieces of Carbon's life story, they're her friends or her allies or the people that know her most, and maybe people that fear her. And in our story, they are the scientists. They are the people from all fields of science: astrophysicists, paleogeobiologists. Oh my goodness! Climate scientists, obviously. So many, a whole raft. because they are the people, they're like our carbon's informants, you know, they're carbon's closest,
Right.
closest
Even
informants, and
Marine.
they tell her.
I love the man who said, and I'll paraphrase, but he said something like, if I could have a love affair with an element, it would be carbon.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was so interesting. So, am I guessing that you made carbon a woman because it's kind of like Mother Earth is a woman? Was that the thinking?
Sort of. That's part of it. Yeah. I didn't, when I first sat down on that day, you know, when I was starting to write those words at the beginning of the film, I have to say, I mean, I'm not ashamed. I have to say, I was channeling carbon, right? It was my voice that tumbled out there, and it continued to be for the film. So
You're a woman.
and I'm me, right? So that's very embedded in this imagining of carbon, because, you know, in this film, that was my voice. So that's one thing. But also, as you start to build the story of carbon and you really start to work on these sequences where carbon is fundamental to, you know, the building of our planet, our world of matter, and of our civilization, and of, you know, these are things which are very she's a builder, she's an enabler, she's what links, you know, links things, links other elements to herself. She's social, you know, there's a whole lot of things which I just couldn't imagine not as a woman, you know. Strangely, again, it sounds nuts, and when people, sometimes when I talk, I hear myself, you know, talk about this, I just think, wow, that's a really wacky idea.
Actually, I mean, it also makes her more accessible and more. It's so part of what I got out of it being a woman was, it makes her easier to relate to and benign. And yet it's our use of her. It's almost like, you know, abuse of women makes, you know, creates the destruction. It's not carbon herself, and carbon emissions themselves are not bad. It's the quantity that's too bad, that becomes bad and destructive, etc. It's how it's used, but there's a relatability. And I mean, I go back to Mother Earth is where I went for myself in thinking about it. And I think it was a very good convention. But now I love when you said, you know, I was writing it and I'm a woman and I was hearing her voice in my head. So there we go. You know, if the writer of it had been a man, maybe carbon would have been a man.
Maybe, right? But maybe it would be so interesting to see that version of the film.
Yeah,
you know, because there are multiple stories of carbon.
Oh, totally.
This is just my one.
Oh, absolutely. What surprised you the most in making this film?
I think I don't think I've been asked that before. I think what surprised me. Okay, like I mentioned from the outset, I wanted to make a film that was looking to change our relationship, and I was hoping to find a way to connect emotionally. What surprised me was actually how profound, how deep I managed to have this relationship with carbon. Like, because in the end, I found through the writing and embodying, I suppose, carbon for so long, I found the connections, the entanglement of carbon across so many aspects of all our lives. So illuminating, so surprising, and the depth of connection. You know, sometimes I just felt so moved by the wonder of it all. And I still do, you know, just thinking about it now makes me think, God, it's so wondrous. And that's even if I'm, you know, and I love science and I've made many science films, and even so, I don't think I've been so emotionally, you know, pulled along in this ride, drawn in, whatever, moved. That really surprised me.
And I think that translated into your ability to move the audience, to bring people along, if I can at least even use myself as an example. And obviously all the myriad awards the film has won. Who did you, I mean, as a producer myself, and in any kind of project, we're thinking about who is the person on the other end of the screen, right? So I don't want to just say target audience. That sounds very like this is a product, but who was your person on the other end of the screen? Who were you thinking about sitting in the audience? Was it another mother who's pregnant? Was it the son? Because it's not written. It has a lot of mature science in it, in English, if I may, in understandable language. But it feels like, frankly, now that it's done, I can see various audiences for it, right? But who did you have in mind as you're making these choices of how to tell this story and the impact you wanted to have?
I have to say, I have to admit, because it's going to sound very selfish, I think it was my son first. He's now 12. So when I was making it, when I started having the idea, he was much younger. And when I took him to the premiere launch, he was 11. He's quite smart, so I knew he could handle that level of science. Bit of a stretch, because it's really it's a bit older, really, would be the audience. And I've shown it to year 10 in Australia, which is about, what's that, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, and that works really well. But yeah, my son, young people. It's almost like my version of a origin story, something like that. You know, we tell origin stories in many cultures so that you understand where you came from and your place in the world. And this is my version of that through science, of helping young people understand that as they embark on their lives, making decisions, making choices about what they want to do in their careers, but also in daily life. So that was the primary audience for me. If you talked to our distributor, they'd probably have a different answer. But for me, that was my primary audience. And then second would be everyone around those young people. So their parents, their teachers, their mentors, their guides. And that's us, Jo, and that's you and me. That's for everyone that knows a young person, right?
Well, what's interesting to me about that too is, you know, in journalism, you're taught to focus on, write as if you are speaking to a fourth grade audience. And it's not to be condescending or patronizing of the audience. It's to make sure that you're being clear and not making assumptions about what they know or what they don't know, for that matter. And I also find that, and my audience is obviously more sophisticated than that, you know, duh. But and we get into some interesting stuff, but we could talk about actual carbon and the science of it. But the dirty little secret is that so many adults and policymakers don't understand all of the pieces of the
Yeah.
subject anyway.
Yeah.
And so in a way of saying, well, I'm going to watch this with my son or my daughter or, you know, kids I know or whatever, the dirty little secret is, and so I can learn about it too, right? But I'm not going to tell them
Yeah.
that I'm, you know, that's teaching. I mean, I may not admit that, right? I would admit it in a 2 second. In fact, I want to watch it again because there's just so much you can get caught into the story of it, and there's so much science in it. And I don't know if you saw in anything that you looked up on me, but I have a famous physicist in my family tree who I did not get his physics brain cells, but I did get his passion for innovation and a passion for physics. I just never studied physics.
Can you tell me who's that?
Albert Abraham Michelson, The Speed of Light.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Okay. All right.
So I particularly relate to light. What can I tell you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I want to learn from this too. And so frankly, as a producer, as a professional communicator, and as a businesswoman, I've been writing about and talking about and speaking about and working towards how do we communicate this issue, and talking to a lot of other experts about how do we communicate about this issue of climate change in a way that, as the film's write-up said, to find imaginative and unexpected ways to incite curiosity without signaling which side you're on, although we kind of do, and to tell the story in a way that doesn't trigger conflict and to shut down some people, right? And so, especially in this polarized time, what did you learn in retrospect, maybe even from doing this film, that we can take forward, and maybe you take forward, to try to communicate, to continue the conversation on these issues in that kind of clever, disarming way?
I think it was very deliberate beginning. I'll start again. The producer on this film, the executive producer, is a woman called Sonia Pemberton. We made the film under the banner of her company called Gene Pool Productions. And she is very, very conscious and with great intent, takes difficult subjects and using science, like polarizing subjects such as vaccines and other things, and with great care and thought, finds ways to tell these stories in ways that are, using science, not just sort of speaking to the ends of the debate, but trying to find ways to talk, and illuminate, without inciting a kind of reaction at first, And so she was the producer, and she and I, me in my kind of natural way, like seeking to, enter the story through the baby in the womb and the biography idea and the voice of, female voice and everything, and her kind of going, and she was interested in working with me because she was like, this could be a way to talk about climate change, in a new way, and perhaps, tap into, different audiences, and perhaps shift people's ideas or perceptions about climate in an interesting way. So the two of us together, it's a team effort. All these things are, kind of brought our, our different ideas, different sensibilities to that. And so me being very conscious that I wanted to tell a science story that began with the birth of carbon, inciting curiosity and wonder, is all about telling good storytelling. Good storytelling is drawing an audience, drawing the reader or an audience into a story, and they want to keep seeing what happens next, and then what happens, and you kind of and so the beginning for me of this film was so critical to get right, and for Sonia too, And the baby in the womb, and the questions around that scene are things like, the way I established Carbon is hearing the voice, but also asking how, and you learn from the beginning of the film that this baby is partly made by pollution. This is going to sound strange, but the story that is told in that first couple of minutes is this baby is partly made of pollution, of waste, of carbon emissions that are captured in the food chain, which are then landing in the cheek, actually, it turns out, of this tiny baby. And so how does this come to be? How is this possible? And it's that kind of, these questions, these mysteries that you establish and that you kind of want to solve, or you want to hear, like, what is this? What is this? What? And it's that incitement of curiosity and wonder, which is what compels me. That's why I love science. That's why I love stories. A good story, it should draw an audience in, and then keep them wondering and keep them in surprising moments, keep surprising, I think for me, it's all about good storytelling. And for Sonia, it was very deliberately about, not repelling sectors of the audience, not, drawing them in, not pushing them away. And slowly, until we kind of, show our deck, of cards, quite late. It's almost like three quarters into the film.
Yeah.
Where you go, it's sort of, it's more it's clearer then what our position is and about climate and about what to do about our changing world. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's intentional. It's also just good storytelling.
So what I'm hearing is we need to inspire and incite more curiosity and tell stories more. And this is something you and I can talk more about offline, because it's so important. And I think you've created I'll say methodology for the moment that I think those of us in the community that want to save the planet, or frankly save our livability on the planet, can learn from a lot. And by the way, just to that point, I think it was actually I don't know, it might have been Catherine Hayhoe, but one of the scientists, I think it was a woman, said the planet will be fine. This did happen before. But it happened before people were on the planet. And so the issue is our ability to live on the planet. Yeah.
That was Catherine. That's what she said. Yeah. It's a good statement.
So a couple more things, and then I want to get some career advice from you. But where did the funding come from for this film?
Yeah. So in Australia, we are very fortunate in that we have a very committed public broadcaster called the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, that do fund science films. Occasionally. No, they do. They do. That's pretty much the public broadcasters in Australia are very supportive of good storytelling science documentaries. Not many of them, because we have a very small population in comparison to the rest of the world, but that was the starting point. They came on board quite early. My collaboration with my Canadian co-production partners. So the other producer and co-director, I wrote the film, but it was co-directed with my lovely Canadian partner, Niobe Thompson, and he has a company in Canada. So together we joined forces because we knew we would need to have finance from around the world. It could not just be funded out of Australia. So Canada and their CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the equivalent, it's their public broadcasters, their public broadcasters. So those were the two original partners, the Australian public broadcaster, the Canadian. We then were joined by Arte in France, which is the French public broadcaster. And they were the three primary initial investors of the film, after which we were able to pull in various government funds. In fact, the agency which I now work for, Screen Australia, was a key investor in the film. I shouldn't say investor, they provided a grant. So seeking government funds from both sides of the world, and those original broadcasters is how we pulled together the budget. So it couldn't have been done without a co-production. And that collaboration with an international partner, in my case, my friend, he's my friend, brilliant filmmaker as well, science person, so many similarities to me. We have the same taste, we like the same music, we have the same values, we have children. So couldn't have been done without that. Yeah, I was very fortunate. We've been trying to work together for a number of years, or we've been thinking about it and talking about it. So finally we had a project where we could collaborate on.
Oh, that's great. What was pitching it like?
It was tricky at first. It was very difficult. Because when you think about it, it's very unconventional science film. Like I say, I've made very many science films before, the more conventional type, and science is in the genres of documentary filmmaking, quite conservative. There's a very established kind of type of science doc. It's generally narrated by a man, and very kind of straight, for a better word, quite a straight kind of filmmaking. I've always tried to make mine a bit different. Female narrators, interesting devices, or interesting ways of telling. But this was like next level, making Carbon a character and doing a biography. So it was difficult at first. What I mean is, people would say, oh, they would turn it down for all sorts of reasons. But so it wasn't until you have those champions, you have those moments. Well, for example, with Sonia in the very beginning, the executive producer, when I talked to her about the idea, and she just kind of, instead of all the other, because I talked about it with other people before, and they would go, oh no, that's just too strange. And for her to go, that's interesting, for her to do that singular person that says, yeah, that's it. You go think about that some more. There's something in that, and then to have that first, in our case, it was the ABC, the commissioner at the time, Josie Mason Campbell, another woman, who said, yeah, I like that. There's something in that. Go think about it. Work on that a bit more. To have those people that go yes, instead of like 1,000 people that say no,
right? And
to have that one person that says yes, and then another person that says yes, and then slowly, those are the things that's they're important, because a lot of people did say no, even to the idea, like let alone the actual pitching of the. With our materials and so forth, but that original idea, which had been nagging at me for a little while. It made 2 other films, I think, and I had this idea at the back of my head, and various producers I had been working for, I just said, no, that's just too strange. So it wasn't until you start going, oh, yeah, there is actually something in this. Listening to myself,
well, that's the other one is, we hear ourselves describe it and we see their reaction and we fine tune our pitch too. But and also just obviously whatever it becomes, you don't know that yet. So you're pitching your idea of what you're going to look for, but no matter what kind of storyboards even one has at that point, the end product never looks like it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There'll be smattering of it. So, first of all, before I get career advice from you, where can people watch the film?
So you're in the States, yeah? So
yes, but my audience is international, but it's a lot of the States.
So Joan, this is one I need to get back to you on. In fact, it was last night or tonight that I'm talking to Sonia. It's currently in Greece, to find out if it's now if it's available on, to download on Apple or Amazon and so forth. Because the sad thing about the United States is that the distributor was not able to get a sale it was probably the only main territory.
That's bizarre.
I know. So it's in Latin America, all through Europe. No, PBS turned it down.
PBS turned it down?
I have a feeling that it just was that step too unconventional for the platform for the American network. Anyways, I have been. I think they're trying various different ways, and depending on where they've landed, I don't know yet. But if all the avenues for broadcast have been exhausted, then it will revert to a pay-per-view type platform. But it's just not there yet. So for Americans, there's only been I think there have been a few festivals that it had been at. But at the moment, I don't think there's any way to see it. So that may not be very useful for your listeners, viewers.
That's okay.
I can fill you in.
Yes, and we'll create a bit of a lobby for it. And you and I can talk about it. I thought I looked for it. I mean, I did a search.
Yeah.
There was anywhere.
Couldn't find it.
Couldn't find it. And
I
thought it might have been on Apple TV, but then I didn't see it.
No, it's not.
And
it's not in the States.
Yeah. So we can chat about that offline. But before I let you get back to your day, and I totally am incredibly grateful for you making time, especially at this ridiculous hour in your day. But I like to give career advice for mid-career women. And I say mid-career because that's a lot of where the drop-off is in leadership, right? And think about a woman who has maybe 15 years of experience, who has an education, who knows what she's good at. And she's ambitious. She wants to make money. She wants to advance her career, but she also wants to make a difference, and she also wants to make a difference. So what advice would you give to her, especially with your extraordinary and creative career?
You're talking about me, Joan. That's me. That's that person. And so I'm not sure if I'm equipped to give such advice, because I'm the person that's seeking that advice, right? But I just know what I'm doing, and what I see and the people around me. So what it depends if they're what kind of if they have a creative ambition, like if they have creative ambitions, which is my field, I can talk a little bit about that, and what I've come to, I guess, what I've come to learn about what it is to be a creative person with ambition and wanting to make an impact. So my advice at the moment to myself is I feel like I needed to become more empowered in my own and have equity in my own projects. So I had come to a point where I've made several, some very high quality, big budget films and series, and I'm very proud of my body of work, and I'm proud. And Carbon was particularly one I was proud of because it was where I finally had a chance, I think, to put my own voice out there, like almost literally. It was Sarah Snook that voiced Carbon, but it was my voice until she voiced it. Anyways, so I felt like I'd come to a point where I was proud, but I also didn't have equity in my work, and I felt like I needed to become my own executive producer. So in feeling that, and feeling disempowered to a degree, I sought out how could I tool, how can I upskill, how can I arm myself, equip myself, not arm myself, equip myself. And in my world, the way I'm doing that is I was lucky enough to join the Federal Screen Agency. So I work for Screen Australia. And part of the motivation, that's twofold. One was that, you know, that wanting to have a very different view of my industry. So I've come from doing one film at a time or a series at a time. It's very insular when you're making that work. It's quite, although I've always worked with good teams, you're still in a very, I feel like I'm in a really tiny corner of the room, you know. So wanting to have a bigger view, learn a lot more about my world and the different opportunities, and meet all the different, you know, the people who are decision makers, but also other collaborators, and also just be inspired by the depth and breadth of creativity. So that's one thing. The other thing is I'm putting myself in a position where I haven't, like I said, I've done enough to know some things and I can help other people. I really love that aspect of mentoring others and giving guidance and advice. I do a lot of that in my role, especially to more emergent producers and documentary practitioners. I do that all the time, every single day. And I really wanted to do that too, because I thought that was my way of making an impact. So for me, I guess in trying to encapsulate this into a nugget of advice is, what is it? I think finding the gaps of where you sit, you know, you have some skills, that's great, but where are the gaps? What do you feel can empower you or make you feel or give you those skills, you know, that you need to fill those gaps? And then look to other people or ways in which, you know, to fill them. I really love mentoring and guiding because for me, that enriches me as well. You know, I've always been about what is, you know, what's enriching me in every single film I do and others around me. I think that might be, I'm not sure if that's specific to me, but for me, I find myself being inspired creatively, you know, my world opening in so many ways by tapping into this landscape, this network out there. And I was so isolated before. So don't be isolated, you know, connect with those around you. And yeah, and keep thinking about, well, for me, keep thinking about what is it that can, you know, give you don't give your power away, you know, like keep your power and try to build on it. That's all I got, because that's what I'm doing. And I'm not sure, you know, I don't feel like I'm an expert in that, Joan. It's just what I'm doing.
Well, I think that's brilliant, actually. And I think it really, it's particularly true for creative people, but I think it's true for anybody. And frankly, it's a lot of what I do by having the privilege of talking to people like you on my show. I mean, we just recently passed our 400th episode. And when I think about the hundreds of women, I only interview women, that are doing some version of this work in one way or another, we're connecting, we're stretching ourselves, we're filling the gaps with each other's knowledge, we're being inspired by each other, and all finding our way. And the beautiful thing for me about this work and this industry is that it's a brand new industry. It's a new canvas. There's whole new career paths being built. There's whole new trajectories that come forth. Like, you know, who would have thought there'd be a trajectory, a career path for making science films about climate change 30 years ago at Screen Australia, even, right? Yeah. So it's an extraordinary time, and so I totally support your career advice, and it's quite relevant to everyone. And I'm glad that I'm grateful that you articulated it so beautifully. So thank you again for the film. It's really, I don't know what what gift you downloaded, my new friend, but any final thoughts before I let you get back to your day?
I just appreciate your interest, Joan, and I appreciate the time taken to, to listen to, to how to ask the questions and to listen. I really do. I think, I think that is such a, it's a gift. It's a gift to me, but it's a gift to others as well, because how else do we share? And I you're helping me share my gift to the world. I think I feel like Carbon is my gift. It was such a precious film to me in so many ways, creatively as well as personally and all of that. So any for anyone that's really kind of really gets it and feels it, it's a gift back to me. So thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for producing it, and we will talk about maybe some ways to get it into the US as well, so people can watch it. So thank you so much for joining us today on Electric Ladies podcast, Daniella Ortega of the documentary Carbon, the Unauthorized Biography. Thank you so much. So what do you think will truly engage people, on what steps and do people need to take to reduce their own carbon footprint? Would you watch this movie?
I think they have to. For me, it's, I hope that the film made this point, and I hope people take this away, and that it's, it is about that. Was his Phil DeLuna going in the end, towards the end of the film, going, you have to vote for people who are advocates for carbon, right? It's that kind of top level advocacy of carbon. Now that carbon, now that carbon's she's like your friend.
I was going to say, or your aunt or whatever.
You know her.
Yes,
you have to advocate for her and find other advocates for her and support other advocates. Like be leaders in in whether it be politics or business or whatever, that are advocates of carbon. That's kind of. That's kind of the idea with that.
Be her caretaker and emergency contact.
Yes.
So thank you so much. You can find more about Daniella on our website in the show notes, and subscribe on our website to our newsletters to find out about Daniella and people like us, like her on our website, electricladiespodcast.com. I'm Joan Michelson. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.